He only meant to keep her safe for one night. She was drunk, alone, and too proud to admit she needed help. So Logan Pierce did what he always did. He showed up. He gave her his couch, covered her with a blanket, and told himself it meant nothing. But when he walked into his living room the next morning, what he found stopped him cold. His 6-year-old daughter, Emma, was curled against Victoria Hale's chest, the most powerful CEO in the city, sleeping like she'd always belonged there. One image, one quiet, accidental moment, and everything Logan Pierce had told himself about his life began to fall apart. If this story already has you, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this is reaching, and follow along to the very end. You won't want to miss what happens next. The rain had been coming down since mid-afternoon, and by the time Logan Pierce pulled into the parking lot of the Meridian Grand, it had turned mean. The kind of steady, cold downpour that soaked through a jacket in under a minute. He sat in his car for a moment with the engine idling, watching the water streak down the windshield, and he asked himself, not for the first time that evening, why he was here. He already knew the answer. Victoria had texted him 2 hours ago, just 4 words. Rowan's thing. Come, please. No explanation. No punctuation beyond the period, which with Victoria meant she had actually thought about it. He'd been in the middle of grading a stack of sophomore essays on The Great Gatsby, ironic in retrospect, and Emma was already asleep at his mother's house for the weekend. He had no excuse. So he came. Rowan Mercer was Victoria's CFO, and depending on the week, either her closest ally or her biggest headache. Tonight's event was a celebration of some kind. A quarterly milestone, a funding round, something Logan never fully tracked. Victoria's professional world existed at a frequency he couldn't quite tune into, all glass towers and 7-figure handshakes and people who wore watches that cost more than his car. He didn't belong in it. He knew that. Most nights, it didn't bother him. Tonight, pulling his jacket tighter and jogging through the rain toward the hotel entrance, it bothered him a little. The ballroom was the kind of room designed to make you feel like you'd arrived somewhere. All warm light and dark wood paneling and the low murmur of 200 people who had all, in some way or another, decided they were important. Logan scanned the crowd and found it the way he always did. Slightly from the outside, the way you watch a movie you didn't choose. He spotted Victoria at the far end of the room and stopped. She was standing near the bar with a glass in her hand. Not her first, he could tell from the way she was holding it, that particular looseness in her wrist she never allowed herself during business hours. She was wearing a dark green dress, and her hair was down, which was unusual. Victoria kept her hair up in public almost as a matter of policy. He'd once made a joke about it, and she'd said, without smiling, "It's not personal, it's architecture." He still didn't know what that meant. She was talking to 2 men in suits he didn't recognize, and even slightly drunk, she was managing the conversation the way she always managed things, with one hand clearly on the wheel. But when her eyes found Logan across the room, something shifted in her face. Not vulnerability exactly. More like relief, carefully hidden beneath everything else she showed the world. He made his way to her. "You came," she said. "You said please," he said. "You never say please." "I say please." "Once. To a waiter, and you looked annoyed about it afterward." One of the suited men glanced between them with professional curiosity. Victoria didn't introduce them. She touched Logan's arm lightly, her version of thank you, and steered him a half step away from the conversation. "I just needed a friendly face," she said, low enough that it was only for him. "How many of those have you had?" he asked, nodding at the glass. "This is my 3rd. Victoria. The first one doesn't count. Rowan gave it to me before I could say no. That's not how counting works." She gave him a look that under other circumstances might have been devastating and turned back to the room. Logan stayed beside her and didn't say anything else about the drinks. He'd known Victoria Hale for 3 years. They'd met at one of those awkward school fundraising dinners where the wealthy parents sat at the front tables and the teachers sat near the back, and Logan had somehow ended up beside her at the bar while the silent auction was happening, and neither of them had anything to bid on. She'd asked him what he taught. He'd said English. She'd said she'd hated English class. He'd said most people who were good at it did. She'd laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. And that had been the beginning of something neither of them had named. They texted. They got coffee sometimes, though Victoria drank it too fast and always seemed faintly embarrassed that she'd agreed to slow down long enough to sit across from someone. She came to one of Emma's school events once, claimed it was because she was passing by, and then stayed for the entire thing and asked Emma 17 questions about her drawing of a horse that wasn't quite a horse. Logan had loved her, quietly, privately, without announcement, for probably 18 months. He hadn't told her. He wouldn't tell her. The math didn't work. A single dad teaching high school English in a rented house with a 2009 Civic in the driveway, and a woman who ran a company that had been featured 3 times on the cover of Business Monthly. These things did not add up to anything that made sense, and Logan was, above most things, a practical man. He'd built his practicality the hard way. Emma's mother, Diane, had left when Emma was 14 months old. Not dramatically. There was no shouting, no thrown dishes, no final scene worth filming. Diane had simply realized, slowly and then all at once, that she didn't want the life she'd agreed to. She'd packed 2 bags over a weekend while Logan was at work and his mother was watching Emma, left a note on the kitchen table that said, "I'm sorry, I tried," and driven to Portland where she apparently had friends Logan had never met. She sent birthday cards for the first 2 years. Then she stopped. Logan didn't hate her. He'd spent a long time working his way to that, and it was real, not performed. He understood that people got to the edges of themselves and sometimes couldn't come back. He just wished she'd had the edges before Emma arrived, so that neither of them, Logan or Emma, would have spent the next several years trying to quietly fill in the shape of what was missing. Emma didn't ask about her mother very often anymore. When she did, Logan answered honestly without adding anything that would make it heavier than it needed to be. He was 32 years old, and he'd been doing this alone since he was 26, and he was, on most days, fine. Some days genuinely fine. Some days the other kind. Check. By 10 o'clock, Victoria was on her 5th drink and visibly losing the fight to look like she wasn't. It wasn't sloppy. Victoria didn't do anything sloppily, even falling apart. But there was a brightness in her eyes that had gone from sharp to soft, to something that wasn't quite focused, and she was laughing a little too easily at things that weren't quite that funny. And when Rowan Mercer cornered her near the dessert table to talk about some overseas deal with the kind of satisfied expression that meant he thought he'd already won, Logan watched Victoria's professional composure slip about 2 millimeters and then catch itself. He moved toward them without deciding to. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Not sorry at all." "Victoria, we should head out soon. Emma's with my mom and I said we'd be back before midnight." It was a lie. Emma wasn't involved. But Victoria looked at him with what he could only describe as gratitude stretched thin over exhaustion and nodded. "Right," she said. "Of course." She turned to Rowan with a smile that could have cut glass. "We'll talk Monday." Rowan looked at Logan the way certain men looked at Logan around Victoria, with a particular flavor of confusion, as if they were trying to identify what category he fit into and coming up empty. Logan was used to it. He smiled back with the genuine warmth he deployed whenever he wanted someone to feel slightly unsettled, and guided Victoria toward the lobby. "You didn't have to do that," she said when they were out of earshot. "You looked like you were about to say something that would be difficult to take back." She considered this. "Possibly." "Rowan?" "Rowan thinks the Singapore deal is already closed because he wants it to be closed." She said it the way she said most work things around Logan. A little clipped, a little automatic, like she was processing out loud. "He presented it to the board last week without running it by me first." "That's not good." No, it isn't." They reached the lobby and Logan pulled out his phone to call a car. Victoria leaned against one of the marble columns and looked at her own reflection in the dark glass of the window beside it. "I don't want to go home," she said. It wasn't dramatic when she said it. It was just honest, which was somehow more disarming. "I'm not leaving you in a cab like this," Logan said. "I'm fine." "Victoria, I'm mildly impaired, significantly impaired. I can hold a conversation. So can my 6-year-old. He looked up from his phone. "You're coming to mine. You can sleep on the couch, and I'll make coffee in the morning." She started to object. He could see it, the reflexive straightening, the professional armor clicking back into place. And then it didn't happen. She looked at him for a moment, and the armor stayed where it was, somewhere else. "Okay," she said. Okay, just the couch. Obviously just the couch. I'm not... Victoria, I know. She nodded once and pushed off the column, and Logan called the car. She fell asleep in his back seat before they reached his neighborhood. Not passed out, she wasn't that far gone. Just genuinely asleep, her head tipped back against the seat, and her hands loose in her lap, the tension she carried like a second skeleton finally somewhere she couldn't reach it. Logan watched her for a moment and then looked out his own window at the wet streets going by. The reflections of streetlights stretched thin across puddles. He thought about Diane, briefly, not with bitterness, just with the particular clarity you get when you're 32 and know yourself fairly well. He had a type, apparently, women who were unreachable, in different ways. Diane had been unreachable because she was running towards something he couldn't see. Victoria was unreachable because she existed in a world that operated by different rules than his, and he was, no matter how much she seemed to like him, seemed to need him in small, specific ways, fundamentally not part of her architecture. He believed this the way he believed most hard things. Not happily, but fully. The car stopped in front of his house. He paid, woke Victoria gently with a hand on her shoulder. "We're here." And she surfaced slowly, looked around, said nothing. He unlocked the front door and she walked inside with the careful precision of someone managing themselves and stood in the middle of his living room with her heels in one hand looking at the bookshelves. He'd always been a little self-conscious about the bookshelves around her. Not because he was ashamed of them. He loved them. They were one of the things he was most unapologetically himself about. But because Victoria's apartment was all clean lines and intentional space, and the kind of absence that comes from having enough money to only keep things that are exactly right. His shelves were crowded and personal and slightly chaotic, stacked with paperbacks and hardcovers, and a few of Emma's picture books that had migrated up from the lower shelves, and a small clay bowl Emma had made at school that held loose change and a broken rubber band, and the cap to a pen he'd lost months ago. Victoria looked at the shelves for a long moment. "I like it," she said, quieter than he expected. "It's messy." "I know." She ran one finger along the spines of a row of novels. "I like it." He got her a glass of water and 2 ibuprofen he left on the coffee table, a blanket from the hall closet, and the throw pillow from the armchair. She took the ibuprofen without argument, which told him she felt worse than she was admitting. He pointed out the bathroom. She said thank you without looking at him, already sitting on the couch and tucking her legs underneath her in one practiced movement that suggested she'd had a long relationship with furniture and comfort. And then, sometime in the last several years, let it go. "Get some sleep," he said from the doorway. "Logan?" "Yeah. She stopped, started again. "I'm glad you came tonight." He didn't say what he wanted to say, which was, "I would have come regardless, for any reason, at any time, and that is something I have decided I'm not going to do anything about." He said instead, "Any time. Seriously." She nodded without looking up. He went to bed. He didn't hear Emma come in. His mother had a key, kept for exactly these kinds of situations. Emma's school schedule occasionally ran against Logan's work schedule in ways that required backup, and his mother, retired and a 10-minute drive away, had accepted the key with the air of someone who'd been waiting for it to be offered. What Logan didn't know was that Emma had woken up at 6 that morning at his mother's house, decided she wanted to be home, and his mother, correctly reading the situation as a small child who simply wanted her own bed, had driven her over and let herself in quietly. Emma was 6. She understood quietly. She also had from birth a completely reliable instinct for the presence of someone interesting. What she found on the living room couch would later become, in family legend, simply the morning. When Logan's alarm went off at 7:30, he lay in the gray early light for a moment doing what he always did, running through the logistics of the day. Saturday. No school. Emma was at his mother's. Victoria was on the couch. He needed to make coffee, check on Victoria, figure out breakfast, and probably spend 30 minutes being awkward about last night in the way he always was when the distance between him and Victoria temporarily collapsed. He got up, walked down the hall, turned into the living room, and stopped completely. Emma was asleep on the couch with Victoria. Somehow, and Logan would piece together the sequence later, from Emma's cheerful and exhaustive account of it, Emma had come home, found a stranger on the couch, and instead of waking her father, had conducted her own quiet investigation. She had stood over Victoria for some indeterminate period of time, studying her. Then, having reached whatever 6-year-old conclusion she reached, she had apparently climbed up onto the couch and arranged herself against Victoria's side. Victoria, asleep, had responded the way a body responds to warmth and presence. She had shifted, accommodated, and at some point drawn her arm around Emma the way you hold something you don't want to drop. That was what Logan found. Emma's small dark head tucked against Victoria Hale's shoulder. Victoria's arm around her, holding her with a tenderness so completely at odds with every public version of the woman that it felt like seeing something private and true and never intended for observation. Emma's fist had curled around the fabric of Victoria's dress. Both of them were breathing slow. Logan stood in the doorway for a long time. He thought about getting his phone. He didn't. He stood there and looked at the two of them and felt something shift inside his chest. A quality of feeling he recognized from the few times in his life when the world had shown him something it hadn't needed to show him, something that meant nothing practically, and everything in some other register entirely. Then Emma opened her eyes. She saw her father in the doorway, smiled the particular smile she deployed when she had done something she suspected was slightly unauthorized but believed she could charm her way through. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. "Hi, Bug." He kept his voice low. "When did you get here?" "Grandma brought me." She glanced down at Victoria's arm, which had not moved. "She was sleeping," Emma whispered, explaining everything. "I didn't want her to be alone." "Right," Logan said. "Of course." Victoria stirred. Her eyes opened back. Gradually, then with the sudden clarity of someone whose brain came online fast, even after a rough night, she registered Emma. Registered Logan in the doorway. Registered her own arm and what it was doing. Something moved through her face that Logan watched from across the room and couldn't name. "Good morning," Emma whispered up at her, very formally, the way she talked to adults she'd decided were worth being formal with. Victoria looked at the small girl pressed against her side and went very still in the way people go still when they are trying to figure out whether they are allowed to feel what they are currently feeling. "Good morning," she said finally, equally quiet. "I'm Victoria." "I know," Emma said. "My dad talks about you." "Emma," Logan said. "He does." She was serene about it. "He talks about you a lot." Victoria looked at Logan. Logan looked at the ceiling. "I'm making coffee," he said, and retreated to the kitchen, where he stood with both hands on the counter and exhaled slowly and listened to his daughter introduce herself, the rest of the way, to the woman he hadn't told her about, in the exact manner of a 6-year-old who has decided, without being asked, that this person is already important. He made the coffee strong, the way Victoria had told him once, in passing, offhand, the way she offered personal information, as if she was testing whether he'd hold it, that she needed it. He'd remembered. He always remembered the things she told him in passing. While the coffee brewed, he scrambled eggs, because it was the thing he could do with his hands that didn't require him to think, and he listened to the sounds from the living room. Emma's voice, going at its usual Saturday morning pace, which was a pace Logan privately described as continuous, explaining the stuffed animals on the shelf. The old bear was Mr. Buttons. The gray rabbit was Clover. The small blue elephant with one ear slightly detached was Peanut, and the story of how Peanut lost the ear was apparently a narrative that required significant context and several digressions. Victoria's responses, from where Logan was standing, were the thing that got him. She didn't do what certain adults did with small children, that elevated, simplified register that was its own form of condescension. She listened. She asked questions, real ones. Why is his ear like that? Did it happen in a fight? And Emma, vibrating with satisfaction at being taken seriously, escalated both the drama and the detail of the elephant's biography to a level that would have impressed Logan's sophomore class. He carried 2 mugs of coffee to the living room and found them on the floor. Emma had apparently relocated them both from the couch, and they were now sitting in front of the bookshelf while Emma gave Victoria a formal tour of the lower shelves, which held her books. Victoria was cross-legged on the hardwood floor of his living room in last night's green dress, with her hair loose and one mascara shadow under her left eye from sleep, holding a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. And she was reading the first page in a low, even voice at Emma's instruction, and Emma was sitting approximately 4 inches away with her hands folded in her lap and the expression of someone at a private performance. Logan set the mugs on the coffee table and didn't say anything. He sat in the armchair. Victoria glanced at him over the top of the book. He handed her the mug. She took it without breaking the sentence, read one-handed for the next 4 pages, and Emma sat beside her like she'd always been there, like this was a completely reasonable Saturday morning, like the world was exactly as large as this room. Breakfast was scrambled eggs on mismatched plates and toast that came out slightly darker than Logan intended, and the 3 of them ate at the small kitchen table that technically only seated 2 comfortably, with Emma on the stool she'd dragged over from the counter and insisted was fine, which it wasn't quite, but which she refused to trade for the actual chair. Emma ate the way she always ate, selectively and with commentary. She told Victoria that eggs were acceptable but not exciting, that Logan always burned the toast a little, but she didn't say anything because she didn't want him to feel bad, and that the best breakfast was the one Logan made on her birthday, which was French toast with the good syrup, not the regular syrup, and the difference between those 2 syrups was apparently foundational. "Which syrup is the good one?" Victoria asked. "The dark one from the farmer's market." Emma said it with the gravity of a person sharing classified information. "He only buys it sometimes because it's more expensive." "Emma," Logan said. "That's true," she said. "That doesn't mean you say it out loud to guests." Emma considered this with genuine interest. "Why not?" Logan looked at Victoria, who was looking at the toast with something that might have been amusement running under the surface, professionally suppressed. "I'll get the good syrup next time," Logan said. "It's really good," Emma confirmed to Victoria, seriously. Victoria nodded. "I'll have to come back for it." It was said without weight, the easy, social thing to say, but Emma's face lit up with a satisfaction that was absolute, and she went back to her eggs, and Logan picked up his coffee and didn't look at either of them. Victoria left at 11. She had a car coming. She'd called it while standing in his bathroom, and Logan heard her through the door. Not the conversation, just the cadence of it, the voice she used for logistics, different from the voice she'd been using all morning. He understood that the morning had been its own pocket of time, and the pocket was closing, and that was correct and fine, and had always been inevitable. Emma was devastated, not loudly. Emma had learned, young, not to make her emotions into performances. But when Victoria came out of the bathroom with her hair back up and her shoes on, and her professional composure restored to approximately 80% of its usual architecture, Emma stood in the hallway and watched her with an expression Logan recognized, the one she got when something was ending that she wasn't ready to end. "Do you have to go?" Emma asked. "I do," Victoria said. "I have some work." "On Saturday?" "Sometimes on Saturday." Emma processed this. "That's a lot." "It is," Victoria said, and something in her voice was very slightly different than it had been a second before. "Sometimes it's too much." She crouched to Emma's level, an unself-conscious movement that Logan registered with a particular quality of attention, and looked at her directly. "Thank you for telling me about Peanut," she said. "I won't forget his story." "His name is Peanut Braveheart," Emma said. "I didn't tell you the full name." "I'll remember." Emma nodded once, like a contract had been signed, and then hugged her. Quick and total, the way Emma hugged. No ambivalence, no performance, just entirely meant. Victoria's arms came around her and held on. Logan, from where he was standing in the kitchen doorway, looked away. He walked Victoria to the door. They stood on the small, covered porch while her car approached from the end of the street, the rain from last night still dripping off the overhang in slow, irregular drops. "Thank you for last night," she said, "and this morning." "Emma did most of the work this morning." "She's—" Victoria stopped, started differently. "She's remarkable, Logan." "I know." He watched the car. "I had nothing to do with it. She came pre-built." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. You had everything to do with it. He didn't know what to do with that, so he just looked at the car pulling up, the way he looked at a lot of things Victoria said, held them somewhere, kept them somewhere, didn't take them out to examine too closely. I meant what I said in there, she said, about coming back. For the syrup. For the syrup. The car was at the curb. She looked at him with something he couldn't read, and other reasons. She walked down the porch steps. He watched the car. She got in. He raised one hand in the approximate shape of a wave, and she raised one back through the window, and then the car moved into the street, and she was gone. He stood on the porch for another minute. Then he went inside and found Emma standing in the living room, looking at the couch. She left her scarf, Emma said. Logan looked. A dark gray scarf was folded over the arm of the couch. He hadn't seen it when they left. I'll get it back to her, he said. Emma picked it up and held it in both hands for a moment. Then she carefully put it back, exactly where it had been. Leave it there, she said. Emma, in case she comes back for it. She looked at the scarf and then at her father with the serious directness that sometimes made Logan feel like she was older than 6 and younger than everything at the same time. She's going to come back, right? Logan thought of Victoria on the floor of his living room, cross-legged in last night's dress, reading Where the Wild Things Are like she had nowhere else to be. Yeah, he said. I think she will. Emma nodded and went to get Peanut Braveheart off the shelf, and Logan stood in the middle of his living room and felt the full specific weight of a life that was too small for what he felt, and maybe, possibly, not as finished as he'd decided it was. He was wrong about the scarf. Victoria came back for it 4 days later. She texted first, "Is Tuesday evening okay?" and then showed up at 6:45 with takeout from the Thai place on Weston because Emma had apparently, at some point during that Saturday morning conversation that Logan had not been privy to, mentioned that it was her favorite. She had brought the specific noodle dish, the specific level of spice Emma preferred, which Victoria had either asked about or written down somewhere because that was who she was. Emma, when she saw the bag, looked at Logan with an expression that contained multitudes. Victoria stayed for 2 hours. She left the scarf again. Logan found it on the couch afterward and held it for a moment, and then set it back exactly where Emma had put it the first time, and went to bed with the clear-eyed, full-bodied understanding that whatever he'd decided about the math of his life and Victoria's life, and how those numbers didn't add up, Emma had already done her own calculations and come to a completely different answer, and Emma, in Logan's experience, was very rarely wrong about people. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and thought about a woman asleep on his couch with her arm around his daughter and the look on her face when she woke up. Not embarrassed, not professional, not calculating, just still, just present, just there. He thought about her voice reading Where the Wild Things Are in the morning light. He thought about, I'll remember. He turned over, pulled the blanket up, and told himself the same thing he'd been telling himself for 18 months, that it was enough to have her in his life the way he had her, that wanting more than this was a form of ingratitude toward a thing that was already good. He almost believed it. Outside his window, the street was quiet. The last of the rain dried up and gone, and somewhere across the city, Victoria Hale was in her clean-lined apartment, surrounded by intentional space. And he wondered, not for the first time and not for the last, whether the space felt like freedom or whether it sometimes felt like something else. He didn't let himself wonder too long. That was the thing about being a practical man in a life that kept offering you impractical feelings. You got very good at turning the lights off. The scarf stayed on the couch for 11 days. Logan told himself it was because he kept forgetting to text her about it. That was not entirely untrue. He was busy. Midterms were coming. He had a stack of essays on Of Mice and Men that had been sitting on the kitchen counter since Thursday, and Emma had a cold that wasn't serious enough to keep her home from school, but serious enough that she woke up twice a night needing water and reassurance and someone to sit on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out. He was tired in the specific way that single parents get tired, not dramatically, just continuously, the way a river is wet. So the scarf stayed, and Victoria kept coming back. She didn't always announce it in advance. Sometimes she texted it an hour before, "So, I'm near your neighborhood is now terrible." And Logan learned that near your neighborhood was a thing she said when she had decided to come and wanted to give him the option of saying no without it feeling like a rejection. He never said no. He was starting to understand that she knew he never would, and that she was grateful for it in a way she didn't have the vocabulary for. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she showed up empty-handed and stood in his kitchen doorway watching him cook and talked about her day in that way she had. Clipped summaries followed by long pauses followed by the actual thing she was thinking about, which was never what she'd led with. Rowan was still a problem. The Singapore deal had developed complications she hadn't anticipated, involving a subsidiary clause that her legal team had flagged too late, and she was managing the board's reaction to it while also managing Rowan himself, who had the specific quality of a man who took accountability for his successes and distributed the weight of his failures across other people. "He told Hargrove it was your call," Logan said one evening, not looking up from the onions he was cutting. "I know. Did you know before or after Hargrove called you?" A pause. "After." "What did you say to Rowan?" "I said thank you for keeping me informed." Her voice was flat. Logan looked up. "That's all?" "That was all I said in the room." She pulled out a stool from the counter and sat down. "What I said afterward, alone in my car, was significantly different." "I bet." "I need him until the Singapore thing closes. Then we'll have a different conversation." Logan went back to the onions. He'd had this conversation before, in various forms. It was one of the things about Victoria that he'd come to understand without needing it explained. She was patient in ways that looked like coldness to people who didn't know her, and ruthless in ways that looked like patience to people who did. She didn't act until she was ready to act completely. It was a quality he respected and also sometimes found slightly alarming. "Emma asked about you today," he said. The quality of the silence behind him changed. "What did she ask?" "Whether you were coming this week." He scraped the onions into the pan. "I told her I didn't know." She accepted this with visible disappointment, which she then decided to redirect at her homework. "I'll come Thursday," Victoria said. "I wasn't fishing." "I know you weren't." She said it simply, no edge on it. "I'll come Thursday." Emma, when informed on Wednesday that Victoria would be there the next evening, spent a significant portion of Wednesday night preparing. Logan discovered this at 9:30 when he went to check on her and found her not asleep, but sitting at her small desk with a piece of paper, drawing what appeared to be a map. "What is that?" Logan asked from the doorway. "A map," Emma said. "Of what?" "Our house." She turned it toward him. It was, in fact, a reasonably accurate floor plan rendered in blue crayon, with each room labeled in Emma's confident 6-year-old handwriting. The kitchen said Kai Chen. The living room said Live-in Room. His bedroom said Dad's Room, and Emma's said Emma's Room, with 3 stars. There was, he noticed, a room at the end of a small crayon hallway that said Victoria's Room. He looked at it for a moment. His daughter looked at him with complete serenity. "We don't have a room like that," Logan said. "Not yet," Emma said. He sent her to bed. He sat in the living room, with the light off for a while after, with the map on the coffee table in front of him, and felt things he was not prepared to feel on a Wednesday night when he had essays to grade. Thursday came. Victoria arrived at 6:15 with Indian food in a canvas bag that turned out to contain, among other things, a set of watercolor paints still in the packaging, which Emma discovered and responded to with the controlled intensity of a child who has been wanting exactly this thing without knowing what it was called. "Where did you even—" Logan started. "I passed a store," Victoria said. "You passed a store that sells children's watercolor sets." "It was on my way." "Victoria, nothing is on your way. You live on the other side of the city." She had already moved past him toward the kitchen to put down the food, and she said over her shoulder, "The traffic on Meridian is terrible. Weston is faster." It was technically a route she could take. Logan stood in his own hallway and watched her move through his kitchen with the familiarity of someone who'd been doing it for months, and understood that she had driven 20 minutes out of her way on a Thursday evening to bring his daughter watercolor paints, and that she would call this practical until the day she died. Emma sat up at the kitchen table. Victoria sat across from her, jacket off, and they painted together with the particular comfortable silence of two people who don't need to fill space with sound, while Logan ate and watched them from his end of the table and pretended to scroll through his phone. Emma was painting something that might have been a house or might have been a very optimistic horse. Victoria was painting with a precision that suggested she had either done this before or was simply constitutionally incapable of doing anything without focus. Her painting was, Logan leaned slightly to look, a tree, a real one, with careful branches and a suggestion of leaves. Not the lollipop tree that most adults paint when you hand them watercolors. A real tree, done quietly and without announcement. "That's really good," Emma said, leaning over to study it. "Thank you." "Mine is better," Emma said, factually. Victoria looked at Emma's painting, which was abstract in the purest sense of the word. "It's bolder," she agreed. "What does that mean?" "It means it makes a stronger impression." Emma considered this and appeared to find it acceptable. She went back to her painting. Victoria caught Logan's eye across the table, and something passed between them. Not a look that meant anything specific, just the kind of look that happens between people who have spent enough time together that they can share a moment without needing to name it. He looked back at his phone. His heart was doing something unhelpful. The thing about falling into something is that it doesn't feel like falling. It feels like the ground is simply adjusting. By the 4th week, Victoria had a mug. Not given to her. She hadn't asked for one, and Logan hadn't offered one, but Emma had decided that the green mug with the small chip on the handle was Victoria's because it was, and had placed it with complete authority on the second shelf where Logan kept the everyday mugs, slightly apart from the others. Victoria, the first time she opened the cabinet and saw it, had stood there a moment before reaching for it and said nothing. She learned Emma's school schedule without being told. She knew which days were library days and which were PE, and she knew that Emma came home on Tuesdays slightly deflated because of a girl in her class named Sophie who had the social tactics of a small corporate adversary. Victoria's advice on Sophie was, Logan thought, substantially more hard-headed than anything a school counselor would have recommended, and Emma found it extremely useful. "She wants you to react," Victoria told Emma one Tuesday evening, sitting on the couch while Emma recounted that day's particular Sophie situation with the detail and narrative momentum of someone who had been storing it up since 3 p.m. "She does these things because she wants to see what your face does." "So I shouldn't make a face?" "You can make any face you want inside, but outside," Victoria tilted her head slightly, "nothing. Just look at her like she said something boring, like you already know." "Know what?" "That you're the most interesting person in the room, and you don't need her to agree." Emma stared at her. "Does that work?" "It's worked for me for 15 years. Emma spent a moment processing this and then nodded with the gravity of someone receiving professional instruction. Logan, from the kitchen, heard this and said nothing. He was making tea he didn't need just to have something to do with his hands. There were nights when the three of them fell into rhythms so easy and so ordinary that Logan lost track of who had initiated them. Emma's bedtime was 8:30, and Victoria had, without announcement or discussion, begun participating in the process. She didn't put Emma to bed. That was Logan's thing. But she would sit in the hallway and continue whatever conversation they'd been having through Emma's bedroom door while Logan did the routine. Emma, who possessed a negotiator's instincts for extending the night, had discovered that if Victoria was available, she could generate additional time by directing questions through the door at her. And Logan had tried exactly once to end this and found himself outmaneuvered by both parties. "You realize she's using you," Logan told Victoria afterward. "I know," Victoria said. "You're not bothered by it." "She's 6. It's going to be a long time before I'm bothered by anything she does." She said it simply, matter of fact, like a thing that had been decided. Logan picked up his mug, put it down, looked at the middle distance. "What?" Victoria asked. "Nothing." "Logan." "It's nothing. It's just—" He stopped, tried to find the version of this that wasn't the full thing. "She's going to miss you if this changes, if it stops." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "What makes you think it stops?" she asked. "Things change." "That's not an answer." "You have—" He gestured vaguely at everything. "You have a whole life, a big one, people in it, things happening. This is just—" "Don't," Victoria said. He looked at her. Don't do that. Her voice was steady, and she was looking at him directly, the way she looked at things she intended to be clear about. Don't tell me what this is. I'm not telling you what it is. I'm saying you're afraid it ends, and instead of saying that you're framing it as a practical concern, she said it without anger, which was somehow more precise. I know that move. I invented that move. The silence between them had weight, but not hostility. She misses her mother, Logan said finally. It came out flatter than he intended, a fact he kept buried usually and was now just saying. Not constantly. She doesn't even fully know what she's missing, but there are times I can see it, this shape of it, and there's nothing I can do about that except just be there for it. And she's attached to you. She's really attached, Victoria. And if you... I know, Victoria said, and then quieter. I know. He looked at the table. She looked at her hands. I'm not going anywhere, she said. You don't have to say that. I know I don't have to. She said it steadily. I'm saying it because it's true. Logan nodded. He believed her, conditionally, in the way he believed most things, with the part of him that was open to it and the part of him that kept a quiet inventory of what it would cost if he was wrong. He told his friend Marcus about Victoria in late October. In the parking lot of a bar after a soccer game, the two of them played in on Sunday mornings with a rotating collection of men in their 30s who took the game seriously but not in a way that excluded people who were bad at it. Marcus had been Logan's closest male friend since college, the kind of friendship built on 2 decades of witnessing each other be wrong about things and staying anyway. Marcus listened to the summary, condensed, Logan style, which meant factual and sparing, and then drank from his water bottle and said, You're in love with her. I didn't say that. You described her for 6 minutes without saying anything bad about her. I said she's difficult. You said it like it was a compliment. Logan had no answer for this. Marcus studied him with the unsentimental clarity of a man who'd watched him go through the Diane years and come out the other side and knew what Logan looked like when he was protecting himself from something he wanted. Does she know? No. Does she feel the same way? I have no idea. That's not a no. Logan looked across the parking lot at nothing in particular. Marcus? I'm just saying, that's not a no. Marcus zipped up his bag. You know what your problem is? You're going to tell me regardless. Your problem is you decided a long time ago that wanting things for yourself is some kind of luxury you don't get. Like you used up your allocation on Emma, which, fine, she's great, I love Emma, but that's not how any of this works. He stood up. She's in your house 3 times a week, and your kid made her a room on a map. How do you know about the map? Emma told me about the map when I picked up Ryan from your house last month. She showed me the map. She was very proud of the map. Marcus looked at him. The kid knows what she wants. Maybe trust that. Logan drove home thinking about that. About the map. About not yet. Said with such complete confidence by a 6-year-old who had not yet learned to hedge. He didn't tell Victoria any of this. What he did was continue to let her come over, continue to stand in his kitchen cooking while she sat on the other side of the counter and worked through whatever was pressing at her that week. Continue to watch his daughter fall asleep on the couch with her feet in Victoria's lap while they watched some nature documentary Emma had become temporarily obsessed with. He continued to do all of this and file it under the life I have, which was genuinely a good life, and tried not to look too directly at the space between what he had and what he wanted. Victoria was not without her own complications. There were evenings she arrived with something tight around her eyes. Not sad exactly, but pressurized. The Singapore deal was proceeding badly in the way business things proceed badly. Not with a clear failure, but with a slow accumulation of problems, each individually manageable, collectively exhausting. She didn't unload on him. That wasn't her way. But he learned to read the particular quality of her silences and leave space for them. One evening in early November, she arrived without food and without her bag and stood in his doorway in her work clothes looking like someone who had driven somewhere and arrived earlier than she intended. I fired Rowan today, she said. Come in, Logan said. She came in. She sat on the couch. Logan made tea because it was what he could do and brought it to her and sat in the armchair and waited. He'd been building a case to the board, she said. Not a coup, nothing that clean, just positioning. making sure that when the Singapore situation resolved, the narrative was already established. She held the mug without drinking from it. He's been there 8 years. I hired him myself. I'm sorry, Logan said. Don't be sorry, it was the right call. You can be right and still feel like hell about it. She looked at him. Then she looked at the tea. I keep thinking about who I missed, what I didn't see. She paused. I'm usually better at reading people. He wanted you not to read him. That's different from missing something. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the street was dark and the light in the room was warm and low, and Emma was upstairs asleep. And in the particular stillness of that night, Logan was very aware of the distance between the armchair and the couch, and the fact that it was exactly the wrong distance. You're always... Victoria started and then stopped. What? You always say the exact right thing. She said it carefully, like she wasn't sure if she meant it as a compliment or something else. It's an unusual quality. I teach 16-year-olds. I've had a lot of practice saying things carefully. She almost smiled, set the mug down, leaned her head back against the couch. They sat there for a while without talking, and the silence was the kind Logan had stopped trying to fill because he'd realized, somewhere in the past 2 months, that Victoria's silences were not empty. They were where she actually lived. He didn't reach for her hand. He wanted to. He made a clear and conscious decision not to, filed it under the same category as all the other decisions of this kind, and sat with it. Emma padded downstairs at 9:15 in her pajamas, with Peanut under one arm, having apparently sensed from the second floor that something was happening worth being awake for. She took one look at Victoria on the couch and climbed up beside her without asking, with the easy physical confidence of a child who had simply decided this was allowed. Victoria shifted to make room. Her arm went around Emma the way it always did now. Automatic, unthinking. You okay? Emma asked her. Better now, Victoria said, and she said it like she meant it, not as a performance for a child, but as a fact she had just discovered was true. Logan watched his daughter and the woman he loved sitting on his couch in the lamplight and told himself very firmly that this was enough. He almost believed it. That was the problem. It was always almost. The photograph appeared on a Tuesday morning in November, and by noon it had been shared 40,000 times. Logan found out the way he found out most things that weren't about his immediate life, late and from someone else. His colleague Dana stopped him in the hallway between second and third period, holding her phone out with the expression of someone delivering news they weren't sure how to categorize. Is that your house? She asked. It was a photograph taken from the street, early morning light, the kind that came in low and pale in November, the oak tree in his front yard still holding its last few leaves. Victoria was on his porch steps, coat on, bag over one shoulder, looking back at something inside the door. Her face was in three-quarter profile. Clear enough. Someone had been outside his house at 7 in the morning with a good camera and a telephoto lens, and Logan hadn't known, and Victoria hadn't known. And now 40,000 strangers did. He stood in the hallway with Dana's phone and felt something cold move through him. Logan, Dana said. I need to make a call, he said. He called Victoria from the faculty parking lot during his free period. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was already managing it, which meant she'd known longer than he had. I know, she said before he spoke. How long? Since 7:30. My PR team flagged it. Victoria, I'm handling it. There was someone outside my house. He said it steady, but it cost him. With a camera. Outside my house, where Emma lives. A pause. When she spoke again, something had shifted in her voice. Not her professional register, something underneath it. I know. I'm sorry. I'm handling the statement, and I'm looking into who it was, and She stopped. I'm sorry, Logan. That's not an abstract apology. I know what that means, that they were there. Emma goes to school at 8. She was in the car with me. Silence. She wasn't in the picture, Logan said. I checked. He'd looked at it 17 times in 3 minutes, mapping the frame. But she was in the car, 30 feet away. I know. Victoria's voice was quiet in a way he hadn't heard before. I know. He sat on the hood of his car and looked at the athletic field, empty this time of morning, the dead November grass. He wasn't angry at her. He'd registered that possibility and checked it the way he checked things, and it wasn't there. She hadn't done anything, but the world she lived in had followed her to his porch, and it had brought its lens with it, and he needed a minute with that before he could be reasonable about it. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He thought about it. "I'm not panicking. I just need to understand what this means now for Emma, for the situation." "The situation," she repeated, not mocking, just noting it. "You know what I mean." "I do." She paused. "Can I come over tonight?" "Of course. We should talk about it properly." "Yeah," he said. "We should." He went back inside and taught the rest of his day and did it well because he was a professional and his students were not responsible for his problems. But between classes, in the small margins of silence a school day never quite eliminated, he kept coming back to the photograph. Not to his face, or Victoria's face, or the 40,000 shares. He kept coming back to the tree in the yard, and Emma climbing it last weekend while Victoria stood underneath it with her arms half raised in the automatic readiness of an adult who isn't sure whether to let a child climb or catch them if they fall. That moment had been private. His yard, his daughter, his life. And now a stranger had cropped the edges of it and handed it to the internet, and that felt like a kind of violation he hadn't had the category for before. He picked Emma up at 3:15 and she was fine, cheerful, full of information about a project they were starting about weather systems, which she said was going to involve a poster and possibly a mobile. She hadn't seen the photograph. She was 6. He wasn't going to show it to her. He drove home and made her an after-school snack and sat across from her at the kitchen table while she ate it, and told him about Sophie, who had today done something involving the art supplies that Emma described as extremely unfair. And he listened and asked the right questions and was her father all the way through without letting anything else into the room. Victoria arrived at 7. Emma was finishing homework. The greeting at the door was normal. Emma heard the knock from the kitchen table and called Victoria, with the particular frequency she reserved for it, the way you call for something you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. And Victoria came in and sat with Emma for 15 minutes while Logan cleaned up the kitchen, and then Emma went to bed because it was a school night and Logan was firm about school nights. After Emma was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table. Victoria had brought nothing tonight. No food, no bag, just herself, which was its own kind of statement. "Tell me what you're actually thinking," Victoria said. "Not the managed version." Logan looked at his hands on the table. "I'm thinking that I have a daughter and a life that exists at a certain scale, and you have a life that exists at a different scale. And for the last 2 months, those scales have been overlapping, and it's been good, Victoria. It's been genuinely good. But today I found out that there are people who watch your life the way people watch a thing that doesn't belong to them, and they will follow it to my front yard, and I can't." He stopped. "Emma can't be a side note in a story someone else is writing about you." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She isn't a side note." "I know that. You know that. The person with the camera doesn't know that." He looked up. "What's the statement? Your PR team? What are you saying?" "That we're friends. That you're a colleague." She said it matter-of-factly, which meant she'd said it before and was watching his face to see how it landed. He nodded, looked at the table. "Okay. It's the safest thing right now." "I know." "Logan." I said okay. He said it without bitterness. He meant it. He understood the geometry of her world well enough to know that a statement like that was a form of protection, for both of them. But there was a particular small weight to it regardless. The official version of a thing, released to 40,000 strangers, which reduced the last 2 months to friends and colleague, and he'd have to carry that weight quietly, which he was capable of, but it wasn't nothing. "I don't want to make you smaller," Victoria said. He looked at her. I don't know how to navigate this yet," she said. "I've never had—" She stopped, tried differently. "My personal life has never been something I wanted people looking at, because there was never enough of it to protect. And now there is, and I'm—" She pressed her fingers against the table. "I'm learning as I go." "Me too," Logan said. They sat with that for a moment. "The board is going to react," she said. "They already are. I got 3 calls this afternoon. All polite, all phrased as concern, all fundamentally the same message. Which was? That my association with someone outside my professional world creates optics that are difficult for the company. She said it with the exact inflection of someone quoting language they found repugnant. And that given the Singapore situation is still unresolved, this is an unfortunate time for distractions. A distraction, Logan said. That's their word. Not yours. Never mind. He looked at her. She looked back, and there was something in the steadiness of it. She wasn't asking for his permission, wasn't seeking reassurance, was just looking at him the way you look at someone you want to be honest with. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to resolve Singapore, she said, on my terms. And then I'm going to have a very clear conversation with the board about what they are and aren't entitled to an opinion on. She paused. But it's going to take time. And in the meantime, things are going to be visible. And I need you to know that before you decide anything. Decide anything, he repeated. Whether this is worth it. For you. She said it plainly, without drama. You have Emma to think about. You get to do that math. Logan looked at her for a long time. I already did the math, he said. And? He picked up his mug, which was empty, set it back down. And I'm still here, aren't I? That. The second photograph came out the following Friday. This one was worse. Not because of what it showed. It was just Victoria's car in his driveway on a weeknight, taken from down the street. But because of the headline that ran with it in one of the city's entertainment gossip columns, Hale Enterprises CEO's mystery. Man, inside her double life. The piece was 300 words of speculation with strategic ellipses and 2 mentions of the Singapore deal as context for what they called her pattern of questionable judgment. Logan read it once, on his phone, in the faculty men's room before school started, and then put his phone in his pocket and went to teach The Great Gatsby to 17-year-olds, which under the circumstances felt appropriate in ways he didn't feel like articulating. The commentary online was the thing he hadn't been prepared for, though he should have been. He was, by the metrics that mattered to those conversations, unremarkable. He was a public school teacher. He drove a 2009 Civic. He was not wealthy, not influential, not interesting in the way that Victoria's world defined interesting. The prevailing sentiment in the comment sections, and he told himself not to read them, and read them anyway, once because he was human, was that she was slumming, that she had either temporarily lost her judgment or was performing accessibility for some strategic reason no one had identified yet. Several people found this amusing. Several found it suspicious. A small number found it offensive on her behalf. No one considered, in any of the threads he read, that it might be neither strategic nor a lapse, that it might just be a thing that was happening between 2 people. That was apparently not a category the conversation had room for. He told Marcus. They were in the parking lot after Sunday soccer, again, which seemed to be where Logan processed most things. You read the comments, Marcus said. Once. Logan, I said once. Marcus studied him. How are you? I'm fine. How's Emma? She still doesn't know. She's too young for this to reach her. He paused. I hope. How's Victoria? Logan looked at the sky, which was gray and flat and offering nothing. She called me Saturday morning, before I'd seen the second piece. She was... I've never heard her sound like that. Like what? Like she was bracing for something. Like she was calling to find out what I was going to do before she let herself need anything. He looked down. She was already deciding she could handle it alone. I could hear her deciding it while we were on the phone. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What did you say? I told her to come over. And? And she did. He picked up his bag. She came over and we had dinner, and Emma painted her a picture and she took it home rolled up in a paper towel, and I think she put it in her car, and I think she probably looked at it for a while before she drove away. Marcus said nothing. She's not... Logan stopped. People who read that article see someone powerful. They don't see... She goes still sometimes when Emma talks to her, like she's trying to hold the moment still so it doesn't move. He shook his head. She doesn't know I notice. But you do. I always do. Marcus threw his bag over his shoulder. You need to tell her. Marcus, I know you have reasons. I know the math. I've been listening to you do the math for months. He looked at Logan with the directness of a 2-decade friendship. But the math keeps changing and you keep adjusting it to get the same answer. At some point, that's not math anymore. That's fear. Logan drove home and didn't decide anything. That was still a decision, he knew. He just needed more time. The executive pressure on Victoria escalated in the third week of November. She told Logan about it in pieces, not all at once. She was not a person who laid things out in sequence. She was a person who worked through things by speaking around them until the center became visible. The board had called an emergency advisory session. Hargrove, the senior board member who'd been Victoria's most reliable ally since she'd taken the company over at 26, had called her privately to tell her that several investors had begun making noise about her fitness to lead during a sensitive period. The Singapore deal had become a symbol they were using, a shorthand for something they'd already decided, and the photographs were being cited. Not officially, but in the back channels where real business decisions were made, as evidence of a CEO who was no longer operating with her head fully in the game. "They're not wrong that I'm distracted," Victoria said. They were in his living room. Emma had gone to bed. Rain against the windows, November doing its relentless thing. "I am distracted." By the situation with Rowan? Or by... Logan stopped. "Both," Victoria said. She was on the couch, shoes off, feet tucked under her. In this house, she allowed herself positions she didn't allow herself anywhere else, and he'd noticed that early and kept noticing it. "I used to be able to think about work from the moment I woke up. That was the default state. Everything else was maintenance." She looked at the middle distance. "It's not the default state anymore." The room was quiet. Logan waited. "Someone told Hargrove," Victoria said, "that the Singapore deal might not be the real issue. That the real issue is that I've built something significant and now I have something to lose, and having something to lose makes certain decisions harder." She said it with a kind of careful neutrality, as if she was still deciding whether she thought it was true. "Do you think that's right?" Logan asked. She looked at him. "I think the person who said it was trying to use it as a weapon. I also think it might be true." The rain came harder for a moment, then steadied. "There's an opportunity in Singapore," she said. "They're framing it as a resolution mug. Get over there, close it in person, spend 6 months managing the restructuring from the ground, full relocation." A pause. "Hargrove thinks I should take it. He thinks it solves 2 problems at once." The way she said 2 problems was very controlled. Logan felt it, what she was saying under what she was saying, and he sat with it for a moment before he spoke. "How long have you known about this?" he asked. 3 days. "Why didn't you—" He stopped. "Tell you." She looked at him. "Because I needed to think about it first, before I brought it to you." She unfolded her legs and sat forward, elbows on her knees. "Because the way I brought it to you mattered, and I needed to be able to do it without it being—" She pressed her lips together. "Without it falling apart in my hands." He thought about what Marcus had said, about fear and math. He looked at Victoria Hale sitting on his couch, one of the most formidable people he'd ever known, trying very carefully to hold something together, and he thought, she does the same thing I do. She just does it at a different altitude. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet. Do you want to go?" She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the rain was consistent and gray. Emma was asleep upstairs. Peanut Braveheart was probably on the pillow beside her. "No," Victoria said, "but wanting things and knowing what's right have never been the same category for me." "They don't have to be different categories." "Logan, I know that's easy to say from here." He leaned forward. "I'm not telling you what to do. I know how your world works. I know I don't fully understand all of it." He looked at her. "But I also know that you drove across the city with watercolor paints because Emma mentioned she liked art, and you sat on my kitchen floor and painted a tree, and you carry a photograph in your wallet." She went still. He'd seen it once, by accident. She'd opened her wallet at his kitchen table looking for a loyalty card for a coffee place she'd recommended to him, and tucked behind her cards was the edge of a photograph, and he'd recognized the quality of it, the paper, and then her hand had moved and closed the wallet, and neither of them had said anything. I didn't know you saw that, she said. I wasn't going to say anything. It was the one from... She stopped. Your mother took it. That Saturday when she brought Emma home. She sent it to me later. I didn't ask for it. I know you didn't ask for it, Logan said. You're terrible at asking for things. Something moved through her face, not quite a smile, not quite crying, somewhere in between. She looked at the floor. I don't know what the right answer is, she said. Neither do I. The board isn't going away. The Singapore thing isn't going away. She was still looking at the floor. And I can't promise you that it gets easier. I can't promise you the cameras go away or the commentary stops or that Hargrove and the rest of them accept it. She looked up. I can't promise you a clean version of this. I never asked for a clean version, Logan said. The room went very quiet. He could hear the rain. He could hear, faintly, Emma's small sounds of sleep from upstairs. She talked sometimes, half sentences, words from dreams that never resolved into anything. He heard his own heartbeat, which was doing something it had been doing for months, and which he'd been ignoring with decreasing success. Victoria, he said. She looked at him. I need to tell you something. And I'm going to say it badly because I've been not saying it for a long time and it's been accumulating. He met her eyes. I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you for over a year and I've had approximately 40 reasons not to say it and I've been honoring all of them. But you just told me you might leave and it turns out I'm not able to honor them anymore. She was very still. You don't have to do anything with that, he said. This isn't a condition. I'm not saying it to keep you here. I'm saying it because you're about to make a decision that matters, and you deserve to make it with accurate information. The silence was long, not empty, full. Accurate information, she repeated. Yeah. She looked at him with something that had been behind everything else for a long time, something she'd been keeping in the register below speech, and her voice when it came was quieter than he expected. You idiot, she said. He blinked. I have been... She stopped, pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes for a moment, and when she looked at him again, there was nothing professional about her face at all. I have been here 3 times a week for 2 months. I drove 20 minutes out of my way for watercolor paints. I carry a photograph. She broke off. What did you think I was doing? He had no answer. He'd had a lot of answers, all of them practical, and they were leaving him rapidly. I know what you thought, she said. You thought it didn't add up, you and your spreadsheet of reasons. That's an unfair characterization. It's completely fair. But she wasn't angry. She was something else entirely, something less armored and more real than he'd ever seen her, and it undid him completely. He reached across the space between the armchair and the couch, the wrong distance, the distance he'd been measuring for months, and took her hand. She let him. She looked at their hands for a moment and then at him, and the expression on her face was not the expression of a CEO or a public figure or a person managing anything at all. It was just a person, holding a hand, deciding to hold on. I'm not going to Singapore, she said. You don't have to decide that tonight. I already decided. She said it quietly. I decided 3 days ago. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't going to tell me I was wrong. Outside, the rain came down. The house was warm and small and real, and upstairs Emma slept with her stuffed elephant and her certainties. And whatever came next, the board, the cameras, the weight of a world that did not understand the arithmetic of this, was still out there, still coming. Logan knew that. Victoria knew that better than he did, but her hand was in his, and neither of them moved, and for now that was enough. For now it was more than enough. She didn't go to Singapore. She also didn't announce that she wasn't going to Singapore, which turned out to matter more than the decision itself. In Victoria's world, silence was its own kind of statement, and when the deadline for the board's expected answer passed without a response from her office, the quiet that followed had the particular quality of a held breath, something building behind it, waiting to release. Logan found out the board had formally requested a meeting the same way he found out most things about Victoria's professional world. From her, in his kitchen, stated plainly and without preamble, the way she delivered facts she'd already processed and was now simply transferring. Hargrove called this morning, she said. It was a Saturday. Emma was at his mother's for the weekend, and the house had the particular quality it got without Emma in it. Not empty, just different in register, like a song played without its melody. They've scheduled it for Thursday. Full board. In person. What's the agenda? Officially, quarterly performance review and strategic direction. She was sitting at the kitchen counter while Logan made coffee. Unofficially, they want to know whether I'm staying, and they want to have the conversation about Singapore on record. On record meaning they want to document whatever you say. Meaning they want to document it so that if they decide to push for a leadership change, they have a paper trail that shows they raised concerns, and I didn't respond appropriately. She said it without drama, the way she said most things that would have caused other people to visibly panic. It's standard practice. I've used it myself. Logan poured the coffee, set hers in front of her. What are you going to say? I haven't decided the full shape of it yet. She wrapped both hands around the mug. But I know what I'm not going to do. Which is? Apologize for any of it. She looked at him with a steadiness that had nothing defensive in it. I'm not going to walk in there and manage their discomfort. I've been doing that for 8 years, and I'm done with it. He sat down across from her. That's going to make some of them angry. Yes. Hargrove? Hargrove is more complicated. He's not malicious. He just believes the company is the most important thing in the room, always. And he's applied that belief consistently for 30 years, and I used to agree with him. She paused. I still agree with him about most things. I just no longer agree that the company is the only thing. Logan looked at her across the counter. She was in one of his sweatshirts. It had happened gradually, the migration of small items, a phone charger, a spare toothbrush, and eventually a sweatshirt left on the back of a chair that had simply stayed there and then been worn. And her hair was down and she looked more like herself than she ever looked in the photographs the internet had of her. Are you scared? He asked. She looked at him like she was deciding whether to answer honestly. Yes, she said. A little. Of losing the company? She thought about it. Of losing the version of myself I've been for the last 8 years and not knowing who comes after. She looked down at the mug. The company I can rebuild. I've done it once, but I built it by being someone very specific, and that person worked because she didn't have anything else she was protecting. She looked up. I have things I'm protecting now, and that changes how you move. It doesn't make you weaker. I know that. She said it quietly. I'm still learning to act like I know it. He reached across the counter and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held on, and they sat like that for a while in the morning light without saying anything else, which was its own form of language by now. The week before the shareholder meeting was the worst week. Not in the dramatic way. No single catastrophic event. No clean crisis to respond to. Just the accumulation of it. The daily pressure that came from multiple directions simultaneously in the way real trouble always did. The board meeting Thursday had been civil and contained and had resolved nothing, which Victoria told Logan meant she'd won the first exchange and the real confrontation was still coming. 2 investment firms that held significant positions in Hale Enterprises had issued statements expressing confidence in the company's fundamentals while carefully avoiding any mention of confidence in its CEO, which was the financial world's way of circling. A journalist from a national business publication had called her communications director requesting comment on a piece about female CEOs and personal brand management, which her team correctly identified as a puff framing for a story about her judgment. Logan's students found out. He hadn't anticipated that. He should have. 17-year-olds were not uninformed about the world. They were, in fact, extraordinarily informed about precisely the kinds of stories that moved fastest online. And the connection between their English teacher and the woman whose name had been in the news for 3 weeks was not difficult to make. Someone figured it out on a Monday, and by Wednesday, it had completed the circuit of every junior and senior class he taught. They were mostly good about it. This was a quality of adolescence he'd always appreciated. Their capacity for being better than you expected in the moments when you were braced for worse. They didn't ask him directly. They didn't make it a thing in the middle of class. But he noticed the quality of their attention shift slightly. A specific alertness. The kind that happens when a person you thought you knew becomes more dimensional. One student, a junior named Priya, who was one of the sharper people in the building and knew it, stayed after class on Wednesday. She had a legitimate question about her essay, which she asked and which he answered, and then she was quiet for a moment while she gathered her bag. "For what it's worth," she said, not quite looking at him, "I think the stuff they're writing about her is unfair." Logan looked at her. "What stuff?" "The thing about her judgment. Because of you." Priya glanced up briefly. "Like having a personal life is evidence of something wrong. It's weird logic." He thought about what to say to that. "You're right that it's weird logic," he said. "That's worth noticing." She nodded, satisfied, and left. He stood in the empty classroom for a moment and felt unexpectedly and completely that he loved his job. Emma found out there was something happening on a Thursday evening when she overheard Victoria on the phone. Victoria was in the hallway, voice low, talking to someone from her legal team about the phrasing of a document Logan hadn't been briefed on. And Emma had come downstairs for water and stopped on the bottom step, and by the time anyone realized she was there, she had heard enough to know that something was wrong in a way that involved Victoria's name said multiple times by Victoria herself, in a voice she didn't normally use. She didn't say anything immediately. She got her water. She went back upstairs. And then 10 minutes later, she appeared in the doorway of the living room, where Logan was waiting for Victoria to finish the call, and said, "Is Victoria in trouble?" Logan turned down the TV. "Come here." She came and sat beside him. She was in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars on them, and she had Peanut under her arm, and she looked at him with her direct, serious eyes that always made him feel like she deserved a better quality of honesty than most adults offered children. "Some people at her job disagree with her about some things," Logan said. "She's working it out." "What do they disagree about?" "About what the company should do next. And about—" He stopped. "About some personal things that aren't really their business, but they're making it their business anyway." Emma processed this. "Is it about us?" He looked at her. "A little bit, yeah." She was quiet for a moment, her hand moving over Peanut's ear, the detached one. "She doesn't have to stay if it makes things hard for her," Emma said. "I would understand." "Emma, I'm just saying." Her voice was very steady for a 6-year-old delivering that sentence. "I don't want her to be in trouble because of me." Logan put his arm around his daughter and held her, and she let him, which she didn't always. She was 6 and had her dignities. He pressed his face to the top of her head and felt the specific weight of her, the specific reality of this small person he'd been raising alone for 5 years. And he thought, she has been carrying consideration for other people since before she could carry anything else. "She wants to be here," Logan said. "You're not driving her away. She's choosing this." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. Then, smaller. "Good." Victoria came into the living room a few minutes later and found them on the couch. She read the room, the way she read rooms, quickly and accurately, and sat on Emma's other side without asking anything. Emma leaned into her. Victoria's arm went around her. Logan looked at the turned-down television, and the three of them sat there in the quiet, and he thought, this is the thing they're calling a distraction. This specific thing. The shareholder meeting was the following Tuesday. Victoria had told him about it 2 weeks prior. It was a semi-annual event, long scheduled, and the timing was not her doing, but the timing was what it was. The board had realized, somewhere in the previous week, that it was the cleanest available forum for the conversation they wanted to have, and the meeting had shifted accordingly from routine performance review to something that everyone in her professional world understood was a reckoning. Logan found out it was happening via a news alert on his phone at 8:15 that morning, which meant someone had leaked that it was significant before the doors even opened. He was at school. He taught his first 2 periods and checked his phone between them and found a text from Victoria that said, "Going in. We'll call you after." That was all. He taught the rest of the morning with his phone face up on the corner of his desk, which he never did, and his students were kind enough not to mention it. He called her at 12:30, and she didn't pick up. He called her at 1. At 1:15, she called him. "It's done," she said. Her voice was different. He couldn't quite name how. Not broken, not triumphant, something in between, something that had been through a long day and come out the other side, and was still taking stock of what it found there. "What happened?" he said. "I'll tell you in person." A pause. It went well. I think it went well. But I need to say it in person. Another pause. Is Emma home today? She gets out at 3. I'll be there at 4. She hung up. He sat in his empty classroom during his lunch period and looked at the window and felt the particular quality of suspense that comes from waiting for news that will shape the next large portion of your life. And he understood very clearly that he was afraid. Not for himself, or not primarily for himself, but for Victoria, who had walked into a room full of people who had decided to make the argument that she was less than she'd been, and who had to make the counter-argument alone, with nothing but the quality of her own conviction and however many years of built trust the room still held. He thought about what Marcus had said, months ago. She rescued us. That wasn't right yet. That was Emma's line from some future he couldn't see clearly. But he thought about it anyway. About what it meant to be rescued by someone who didn't know they were doing it. About the particular blindness required to show up, repeatedly, with watercolor paints and Thai food, and your arm around a sleeping child, without recognizing it as the act of someone who needed rescuing as much as anyone. She arrived at 4:10, and Emma, who had been home for 45 minutes and had spent that time making a card at the kitchen table for no stated reason, presented it immediately at the door. It said Victoria, in large careful letters on the front, and inside it said, "You're the best," with a drawing of 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small, all holding hands with very round heads. Victoria stood in the doorway and looked at the card and said nothing for a moment. "Emma," Logan said from behind his daughter, "the word is you're with an apostrophe." "I'll fix it later," Emma said, completely unbothered. She looked up at Victoria. "Are you okay? You look tired." "I'm okay," Victoria said. "Thank you for this." She held up the card and her voice was steady, and Logan could see the effort required to keep it that way. Emma accepted this, satisfied, and went back to the kitchen to finish something she'd been working on. The way Emma moved through the world, complete investment in one thing, then clean redirection to the next. Victoria came inside. Logan closed the door. She stood in his hallway and he looked at her and she looked at him, and he could see it on her. The day, all of it, the accumulated weight of having been in a room where people were deciding your value and having to sit through it and respond to it and not let it reach anything vital. "Tell me," he said. She sat on the bottom stair. Not the couch, not the kitchen. The bottom stair, which was where Emma sometimes sat when she came downstairs and wasn't ready to fully commit to being in a room. Logan sat beside her. "I didn't do what they expected," Victoria said. "They expected management. They expected the version of me that walks into difficult rooms and makes everyone comfortable with an outcome they've already decided." She looked at her hands. "I didn't do that." "What did you do?" "I told them the truth." She said it quietly. "Not a managed version of it. The actual thing." She looked up. "I told them that the Singapore move was always about making the board comfortable, not about what was right for the company. That the real solution to Singapore was a structural one that could be managed from here, and I'd been avoiding saying so because I was trying to hold the peace." She paused. "I told them that I'd built this company from 26 years old by making them comfortable before making the right call, and I was done with that sequence. The right call first." How did they respond? 3 of them were angry. 2 of them were quiet in a way that meant they were recalibrating. Hargrove, she stopped. Hargrove asked me one question. He said, "Are you still the person who built this company?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Then act like it." And he voted with me. Logan looked at her. "He voted with you." 4-3. She let out a breath that had been in her for a while. "The Singapore restructuring proceeds without relocation. Domestic management. I keep operational control." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes briefly. "The 3 who voted against me are not going away. This isn't finished. But it's not lost." "No." She dropped her hands. "It's not lost." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What else?" "There's something else." She looked at him. He knew her face well enough now to read its margins. "At the end of it," she said, "after the vote, Hargrove came to me privately. And he said," she paused, "he said he'd seen me build something from nothing. and he'd watched me be hard in the ways that required hardness, and he'd respected it. But he said the person who walked into that room today was someone he'd never quite seen before. She said it carefully. He said she was better. The word landed between them and stayed. He said she was better, Logan repeated. Yes. He thought about that. About a 60-year-old man who had watched someone be exceptional for 8 years, saying they were better now. About what had changed between the person Hargrove had watched before and the person he saw today. About watercolor paints and Thai food and a photograph carried in a wallet. Victoria, Logan said. She turned to look at him. I need you to hear this. He met her eyes. What they've been calling a distraction. All of it. This house, Emma, whatever this is between us. That is not making you less. That's not dividing your attention or softening your edge or any of the other things they've been implying. He said it steady, each word placed where he meant it. Hargrove said she was better. That's not a coincidence. Victoria looked at him for a long time. Something in her face moved. Not dramatically, no tears, nothing that performed itself. Just a shift, like a door opening inward to a room she'd kept locked for a long time. You know what the worst part of the last few weeks was? She said. Tell me. Not the board, not Hargrove, not the photographers or the comment sections. She looked down at the card Emma had made, which she was still holding. The worst part was thinking, for about 48 hours, that I might have to choose. She looked up. That the life I was building here and the life I'd built there were incompatible. That to keep one I'd have to give back the other. And now? And now I think that was never actually the choice. She looked at the card again. You're the best. I think that was fear speaking, mine and everyone else's. From the kitchen came the sound of Emma humming something tuneless and specific to whatever she was doing, the sound she made when she was occupied and content and not yet in need of anyone. It was one of Logan's favorite sounds. He hadn't realized that until right now. Stay for dinner, he said. I was going to, she said. I know. He took the card from her hands and looked at the 3 round-headed figures holding hands. The tall one and the medium one were the same height, which wasn't accurate, but maybe it was how Emma saw it. Emma drew you same height as me. She did? Victoria said. That's a statement. Emma makes a lot of statements. She stood, and something had shifted in her body. Some of the day's weight redistributed into something more bearable. She extended a hand, and he took it, and she pulled him up off the bottom stair. You should know, she said, not letting go of his hand, that tomorrow the 3 who voted against me will probably have opinions they'll want to share with certain journalists. I know. It's going to get loud again before it gets quiet. I know that too. She looked at him. You're not worried. I'm worried about a lot of things, he said. That's not one of them. She looked at him for a moment longer, and then she walked into the kitchen where Emma was, and Logan stood in the hallway and listened to his daughter's voice climb into brightness at having Victoria back in the room, and he thought about what Hargrove had said. She was better. He thought about the person Victoria had been the first time he'd seen her at that school fundraiser, sharp and fast and armored all the way down, and the person she was now, standing at his kitchen counter asking Emma what she was making. The same person. Not softer, just larger. The way a room gets larger when you open all the windows. He walked into the kitchen. Emma was explaining the card. Victoria was listening with complete attention. The light was on over the stove and the evening was coming down outside. And Logan looked at his kitchen. The mismatched mugs, Emma's drawings held to the fridge by plastic letter magnets, the green mug with the chip on the handle on the second shelf, and understood, with a clarity that required no adjustment and no asterisk, that this was his life. All of it. Exactly this. Hargrove was right that it would get loud before it got quiet. The 3 dissenting board members didn't go to journalists directly. People at that level never did anything directly. But within 48 hours of the vote, 2 separate financial publications had pieces that quoted anonymous sources with intimate knowledge of the board's concerns. The framing was careful and deniable and unmistakable. A CEO who had allowed personal entanglements to compromise her strategic judgment, who had rejected a sound overseas expansion in favor of domestic convenience, who was no longer operating with the singular focus that had built Hale Enterprises from a mid-sized consulting firm into something that belonged on the cover of magazines. Logan read both pieces on a Wednesday morning before school. He read them the way he'd learned to read things about Victoria, carefully, with attention to what was actually being said underneath the words that were being used to say it. What was actually being said was, "She chose differently than we wanted, and we are going to make her pay the price in public narrative, slowly, at a cost she can track but not easily counter." He texted her, "Read them both. You okay?" Her response came 4 minutes later. "Better than they are." He put his phone in his pocket and went to teach The Great Gatsby, which remained, in his professional opinion, the most useful novel in the American canon for understanding the gap between the story people tell about themselves and the one that's actually happening. What followed was 6 weeks that Logan would later describe to Marcus as the period when things were genuinely hard in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. Not because any single thing broke, but because the accumulation of pressure was constant and came from directions he couldn't always track. Victoria was in back-to-back crisis management for most of it. Not the dramatic kind, but the grinding daily kind that required her to be present and sharp, and 2 moves ahead at all times while also managing the board dynamics that the vote had left unresolved, the Singapore restructuring that was now proceeding on her terms but still required oversight, and the ongoing low-frequency noise of a press narrative that had decided she was an interesting story and wasn't ready to let it go. She was tired in a way he hadn't seen before. Not broken, Victoria didn't break in visible ways, but worn thin at the edges, the places where her reserves usually covered everything showing through. She still came over. Sometimes she arrived and sat at his kitchen table and didn't talk about any of it, just existed in the room while Emma did homework and Logan cooked. And Logan understood that this was what she needed and didn't push for anything else. Other times she talked through it with the focused intensity of someone who didn't have anywhere else to put it, and he listened and occasionally said the thing that shifted the angle of something and watched her file it away and use it. Emma adapted to the version of Victoria that showed up during those weeks, with the particular grace that children have when they understand something is wrong without being told what it is. She was quieter than usual around her. She brought her drawings without explaining them. She sat beside her on the couch during the nature documentary phase, which had now expanded to cover deep-sea creatures and migratory birds, and asked questions about the screen rather than the situation, which was its own form of consideration. One evening, Logan found them both asleep on the couch. Emma horizontal with her feet in Victoria's lap, Victoria upright with her head dropped against the cushions, one hand resting on Emma's ankle. The television was on low. The light was the warm lamp light of late evening. He stood in the doorway for a long moment and felt the specific quality of something that had been frightening becoming, instead, simply true. He turned off the television and went to bed. The turning point came in the second week of December, and it came from a direction none of them had anticipated. Victoria's communications director, a woman named Sasha, who had worked with her for 4 years, and who Victoria described as the only person in her professional life who told her things she didn't want to hear before she needed to hear them, called Logan's cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in the faculty parking lot between the end of school and pickup, eating a sandwich he'd made that morning and forgotten about. "This is unusual," Logan said when she identified herself. "I know," Sasha said. She had a direct, clipped quality that reminded him slightly of Victoria in professional mode, which probably explained their working relationship. "I'm calling you because I can't say this to her without it becoming a strategic conversation, and this isn't a strategic conversation." "Okay," Logan said. "The narrative is not going to self-correct," Sasha said. "The 3 board members are patient, and they're going to keep feeding it in small doses until it accumulates enough weight to force a formal confidence motion. Victoria knows this. She's managing it the right way professionally, but the professional management alone isn't going to be enough because the story they're telling isn't really a professional story." A pause. "It's a personal story, and the only person who can change a personal story is the person it's about." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Victoria has been protecting your family from the press version of this, and I understand why, and it's the wrong call." She said it without apology. Not because the protection isn't the right instinct, but because the vacuum it creates is being filled by other people's version of events. And other people's version is that she's distracted and compromised and running from something. Another pause. She's not running from anything. She's running towards something. And nobody knows that except the people in your house. Logan sat with his sandwich in the parking lot for a moment. You're asking her to go public, he said, with all of it. I'm asking you whether you'd consent to it, because she won't ask you. She'll decide it's too much to put on you, and she'll keep managing it alone, and it'll cost her something she shouldn't have to give. Sasha's voice was steady and not unkind. She doesn't ask people for things. I assume you've noticed. I've noticed, Logan said. So I'm asking instead. He looked out through the windshield at the school building, the buses lined up along the curb, his ordinary life arranged in its ordinary geometry. Emma would be out in 12 minutes. He thought about the 6-year-old who had drawn a map with a room for someone she'd met twice and labeled it not yet with the certainty of a person who understood futures better than most. What would it involve? He asked. A statement, Sasha said. Her words, her voice, no journalist, no interview, no managed rollout, just the truth about what the last few months actually were. She'd addressed the board situation, Singapore, and the personal narrative, directly, once. And Emma? That's your call entirely. Her name wouldn't appear without your explicit sign-off. Nothing about her without you deciding it first. Logan nodded at no one. When would you need an answer? I needed it yesterday, Sasha said, but I'll take today. He picked up Emma at 3:15, and she was full of information about a science experiment involving celery and food coloring that had produced results she described as very surprising and slightly gross. And he drove home and let her tell him about it in full, every detail, because she was 6, and the celery experiment mattered, and everything else could wait until she was in bed. He called Victoria at 9. I talked to Sasha, he said. A silence. Of course you did, Victoria said, and it wasn't quite anger, more the sound of someone who has been outmaneuvered by people who know them well. She's right, Logan said. Logan. She's right, and you know she's right, and the reason you haven't done it is because of me and Emma, and I need you to hear me say clearly that I'm not asking you to protect us from this. He said it steady. I trust you with this. I trust what you'd say about it. And Emma drew you a map of our house with your own room in it. She's not fragile about this. The silence on the other end was different now. I don't want to make her part of a public conversation, Victoria said. She's 6. She doesn't get a vote. She gets a parent making the call. I'm making the call. He leaned against the kitchen counter. Say what's true. Say it in your voice. Don't make it a press strategy. Just say the actual thing. And what's the actual thing? That's your sentence to write, he said. Not mine. A long pause. He heard her breathing and the particular quality of her silence that meant she was deciding something, really deciding it. Not running scenarios, but settling on the thing underneath them. I'm scared, she said. I know. Not of the board, not of the investors. I know what you're scared of. If I say it publicly, she stopped, it becomes a different kind of real. It's already real, Logan said. It's been real for months. You're just the last one to say it out loud. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay. I'll write it tonight. Send it to me before you send it to Sasha. She sent it at 11:47. He read it at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the particular stillness of a house where a child is asleep upstairs and the rest of the world is on the other side of the windows. It was 5 paragraphs. It was in her voice, completely, unmistakably, the voice she used when she wasn't managing anything, the voice from his living room floor and the bottom stair and the couch on the night she fired Rowan. It said what had actually happened. It said what she had found. It said what she had chosen and why, and it said it without performing vulnerability and without the corporate smoothness of managed communication and without any of the things people said when they were saying things for an audience. In the last paragraph, she said, "The accusation has been that I became distracted. I want to be precise about what actually happened. I became more complete. Those are not the same thing, and I am no longer willing to pretend they are." He texted her, "Send it." She sent it at midnight. Dumped. The response was not simple, because nothing was simple. Three of the investors who had been circling issued statements that were carefully non-committal, which in context meant they were recalibrating. The three board members who had voted against her released a joint statement reaffirming their concerns, which backfired almost immediately when Hargrove publicly countered it with a statement of his own that was 4 sentences long and said, in the plainest possible language, that he had known Victoria Hale for 8 years, and that the CEO who had walked into the shareholder meeting and made the case for the domestic restructuring was the most clear-eyed he had seen her, and that he trusted her judgment with the company and saw no basis for a confidence motion. Hargrove's 4 sentences turned out to matter more than everything the 3 dissenting members had been building for 6 weeks. He was the oldest voice in the room and the most respected, and when he spoke that directly in public, it changed the weight distribution of the entire conversation. The press narrative didn't vanish. It mutated, as press narratives do, into something slightly different. The story of the distracted CEO was harder to sustain against the story of a CEO who had made a domestic restructuring call that the financial data, within 2 weeks of execution, had started to validate. Numbers don't have a personal life to criticize. The Singapore subsidiary, restructured and managed remotely, with a team Victoria had spent November building and December deploying, had its first clean quarterly projection in 18 months. Rowan, who had landed at a competitor and had been quietly providing color commentary to anyone who would listen, went silent. Logan suspected Sasha had something to do with that, though Victoria never confirmed it, and Sasha, when asked, simply changed the subject. What replaced the noise was not victory. Logan was too practical to call it that, and Victoria was too clear-eyed, but a settling. The kind of settling that happens when a thing that has been contested long enough simply becomes established. She had made her choice publicly, and the choice was holding, and gradually the people who had been waiting to see which way it went began to orient themselves accordingly. February came in cold and ordinary, the way February always did, and life arranged itself around the shape of what they'd become. Victoria's apartment remained where it was, across the city, clean-lined and intentional and increasingly theoretical. She slept there 2 or 3 nights a week, for the form of it, because moving in was a conversation that hadn't been had yet, and both of them were by nature people who didn't rush the conversations that mattered. But her presence in Logan's house had long ago moved past guest into something with no clean category. Her shampoo on the bathroom shelf, a jacket on the hook by the door, the green mug on its shelf with the everyday cups. Emma had stopped treating her arrival as an event and started treating it as a fact, which was the truest measure of how settled things had become. She no longer ran to the door. She called out from wherever she was, "Hi, Victoria," with the casual warmth of someone greeting a permanent fixture, and went back to what she was doing. And Victoria would come find her, and they would resume whatever was ongoing between them, which was always ongoing, always mid-conversation. The watercolor paints had been replaced twice. Emma's painting had progressed from abstract expression to something more deliberate, and Victoria had, without announcement, begun researching after-school art programs with the thoroughness she applied to things she'd decided were worth her attention. She'd given Logan a printed list one evening, ranked by distance from Emma's school, with 3 she'd marked as having instructors whose work she'd looked up online. He'd looked at the list and then at her, and she'd said, "She has an eye. That should be developed." He'd enrolled Emma the following week. Marcus came for dinner in late February, and afterward, while Victoria was inside helping Emma with a bath time argument about whether a stuffed elephant qualified as a bathtub toy, sat with Logan on the porch in the cold with 2 beers. "She's different," Marcus said. "Who, Victoria?" "Both of you." He looked at the street. "You're different." Logan thought about it honestly. "I know. Better different." "I think so." Marcus drank his beer. "You know what I remember? That conversation in the parking lot. You doing the math. Very confidently explaining why it couldn't work." "I remember. The math was wrong." "The math was wrong," Logan agreed. "What changed?" He looked at the oak tree in the yard, the one Victoria had been standing under when Emma climbed it, arms half raised. The one that was in the photograph taken from the street, the first one. The one that had cracked everything open. "She sat on my kitchen floor in last night's dress and read a picture book to my kid," he said. "And I kept trying to convince myself that was a small thing." And it wasn't a small thing. Marcus nodded like he'd always known this, which he had. The proposal happened on a Thursday evening in March, during a blanket fort. This was not the plan. Logan had not had a plan precisely. He had a ring. He'd had it for 3 weeks, purchased from a jeweler on Caldwell Street who had shown him 15 options, and Logan had chosen the one that looked least like a performance of what a ring should look like and most like something a person would actually want to wear. He'd been carrying it in various pockets, waiting for the right moment, which he'd been informed by every person who had ever proposed that you would know when you saw it, and he had been somewhat skeptical of this advice and was now forced to acknowledge it was accurate. The blanket fort had been Emma's idea, as most things were. She had come home from school with a specific vision involving the couch cushions, every blanket in the house, and the 2 chairs from the kitchen, and she had begun construction with the confidence of a person who assumes the adults in the vicinity will assist. Victoria, who had arrived an hour before and was still in her work clothes, had been recruited immediately and was now engineering the structural corner that kept collapsing, while Emma provided direction and Logan held up the ceiling section and tried to explain the load-bearing principles involved, which Emma listened to politely and then ignored. They got it built. It was good, genuinely good, tall enough that an adult could sit inside without their head pushing up the ceiling, with the couch cushions along the bottom and a battery lantern Emma had retrieved from the hall closet, and they all 3 crawled in and sat cross-legged in the small, warm light while Emma arranged Peanut and the other occupants of the blanket fort's residential quarter and told them, individually, that they were safe. Victoria had her jacket off and her shoes outside the fort and her hair down, and there was a small streak of gray blanket lint on her shoulder from the construction phase, and she was listening to Emma brief Peanut on the fort's amenities with the focused attention she gave everything Emma said, and the lantern made the light gold and warm and low. And Logan looked at the 2 of them and felt the ring in his jacket pocket and thought, this is it. This is exactly it. There is no better version of this moment. He reached into his pocket. Emma was mid-sentence about the pillow arrangement. Logan touched Victoria's arm, and she turned to look at him, and he opened his hand. The ring was small and plain and real, a thin gold band with a single stone that caught the lantern light and held it. Victoria went still. I know this isn't... Logan started, and then stopped, because Emma had gone very quiet and was looking at what was in his hand with eyes that were doing something complicated. He started again. I know this isn't a grand gesture. There's no restaurant, no speech I've been working on. He looked at Victoria. I've been trying to find the right version of this for 3 weeks, and this is where we are, in a blanket fort, with all 3 of us, which is... I think that's right, actually. I think that's exactly right. Victoria was looking at the ring and not at him, and her face had the expression he'd come to know as the one she wore when something had reached the part of her she'd spent a long time protecting. Victoria, he said. She looked up. Marry me, he said, not with a question mark. He'd thought about that. It was how he meant it. The blanket fort was very quiet. Outside it, the house was ordinary. The refrigerator hum, a distant car on the street, February's last cold breath against the windows. Emma was holding Peanut and not making a sound, which was its own kind of miracle. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face move through several things she didn't say, the way it always did when she was arriving at the true version of something. Yes, she said. She said it before he'd quite stopped holding his breath, which meant it wasn't the result of deliberation. It came from somewhere that had already decided, a long time ago, maybe the morning she'd woken up with a small girl asleep against her chest, and felt something she hadn't known she was missing until it was there. Emma made a sound that was not quite a word and launched herself at both of them simultaneously, which was physically improbable but successful, and the 3 of them were tangled together in the blanket fort. And the lantern tipped slightly and righted itself. And Victoria was laughing. A real one. The kind Logan didn't hear often enough and recognized immediately when it came, surprised and unguarded and completely hers. Emma pulled back to look at the ring, which Victoria was now wearing, and studied it with the seriousness of a jeweler. It's pretty, Emma said. Yes, Victoria said. Does this mean you're going to live here? We haven't talked about... Logan started. Yes, Victoria said. Victoria, I'm going to live here, she told Emma. with the finality she used for things she'd already decided. We can discuss the logistics with your father later. Emma accepted this completely and went back to briefing Peanut, who had apparently missed the announcement and needed to be caught up. Logan looked at Victoria. "We're discussing the logistics later," he said. "Absolutely," she said, and she was still smiling, and she leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they sat in the blanket fort while Emma talked to a stuffed elephant, and the lantern made everything gold. In the months that followed, the things that had seemed immovable turned out to be movable. The board reconstituted itself by summer. One of the 3 dissenting members resigned to pursue other interests, which was the language people used when a position had become untenable, and his replacement was a woman named Dr. Carol Ashby, who had spent 20 years building companies and had no patience for conversations that dressed up personal grievances as strategic concerns. The Singapore restructuring closed its first full quarter in the black. Hargrove, at the annual company retreat in August, made a toast that was technically about the company's performance and actually about something else, and everyone in the room understood both things simultaneously, which was the way Hargrove communicated when he chose to. Sasha sent Logan a bottle of very good whiskey with a card that said only, "Thank you for picking up the phone." He kept the card. Victoria moved in on a Saturday in April, with a moving company that was efficient and professional and slightly bewildered by the degree to which the apartment being vacated appeared to have been lived in by someone who owned very good furniture and almost no personal items. Logan's house absorbed her things in the way it absorbed everything, with the organic untidiness of a space that had always been shaped by the people in it, rather than by a design principle. Her clean-lined aesthetic and his crowded shelves reached an accommodation that was not quite either of their preferences and was entirely itself. She bought a print she liked at a gallery, and it went on the wall beside the bookshelves. And he thought it looked good there and said so, and she looked at him with something that was not quite surprise and was not quite satisfaction, and was exactly what it had always been between them. Emma got her room. Not a new one, they weren't moving, but her existing room was repainted at her specific direction in a color she described as almost yellow, but better, which turned out to be a shade of warm gold that in the late afternoon light made the whole room glow. Victoria supervised the painting with the project management focus she brought to things she'd committed to. Logan made sandwiches, Emma narrated. The map with Victoria's room stayed in Emma's desk drawer. Logan found it one afternoon while looking for a pencil and left it where it was. The wedding was in October, small and entirely theirs. Logan's mother cried. Marcus gave a toast that contained 2 accurate things about Logan and 1 accurate thing about Victoria and 1 observation about the parking lot conversation that Logan had not given him permission to share publicly, and which got a laugh from everyone who knew either of them. Sasha came. Hargrove sent flowers with a card that was 3 sentences, the last of which was, "I was right about her. I'm glad to have been." Emma was the one who carried the rings, which she did with the gravity of a person assigned an important responsibility and the particular quality of restraint that meant she'd been holding in her excitement since approximately 7 that morning. She handed them over at exactly the right moment, having apparently rehearsed, and then stood beside Logan during the rest of it and held his hand, which she didn't usually do in public anymore because she was 7 now and had dignities, but did today without self-consciousness. Victoria stood across from him, in a dress that was simple and not white and exactly right, and said the things you say at a wedding that are the same words everyone uses and somehow still entirely specific to the 2 people saying them, and Logan said them back, and Emma stood beside him holding his hand, and the October light came through the windows of the small room they'd rented for exactly this gathering, and nothing was perfect. The caterer was 20 minutes late. The boutonniere Logan was wearing had lost a pedal somewhere between the car and the room. Marcus mispronounced Victoria's middle name during the toast, and she corrected him from the head table with the same expression she used in board meetings, which got a bigger laugh than the toast itself. Emma spilled a small amount of juice on the tablecloth and was briefly devastated about it and then wasn't, because Victoria told her that a tablecloth that had been used at a wedding was supposed to have something spilled on it, which Logan had no idea if that was true, but Emma accepted it completely. At the end of the night, when Emma had been taken home by Logan's mother, and the guests were gone, and the venue was just the 2 of them in a room with empty glasses and the good October dark outside, Victoria sat at the edge of the table and Logan stood in front of her and she looked at him. "Are you happy?" she asked. He thought about it honestly, which was how he thought about things, which was one of the qualities she'd told him once she'd noticed about him, in that careful, sideways way she offered personal information. "Yeah," he said. "Are you?" She looked at him for a moment, and he watched her do what she always did, arrive at the true version of the thing, past the version she might have said instead. "I didn't know what this was," she said. "For a long time. I kept looking for the right category for it, and I couldn't find one." She looked at her hand, and then I stopped looking and it was just this, which is better than any category I had. He took her hand. She stood up, and they stood in the empty room in October, and he thought about a rainy night 2 years ago, and a couch, and a gray scarf, and a woman he told himself was unreachable, and the morning that had followed, and every morning since, and the impractical, unmathematical truth that some things don't add up the way you expect them to, and still come out right. "Take me home," she said. "Yeah," he said. Years later, and it would be years, real ones, full of the ordinary friction and beauty of a life that two people were building together imperfectly and without a clean blueprint, Emma would tell the story to anyone who asked, and some who didn't. She'd be older, with her mother's specific kind of directness and her father's habit of pausing before the true sentence, and she'd tell it the way she'd told it since she was 7, with the conviction of someone who had been there and understood it better than anyone. She'd say, "My dad found her at a party. She was drunk and alone, and he brought her home and let her sleep on the couch." She'd pause. He thought he was rescuing her, and she'd smile, the particular smile of someone who has known the punchline since the beginning, but she was the one who rescued us. The truth of it, the full truth, the one Emma had been carrying since the morning she'd climbed onto a couch next to a stranger who held her in her sleep, was more complicated than the story's clean ending, and Emma knew that too. She knew her father had spent years making himself small in a life he'd decided had a fixed size. She knew Victoria had built something magnificent and armored and had nearly disappeared inside it. She knew that the thing that had cracked both of them open was not some grand romantic gesture or cinematic declaration. It was a couch, a rainy night, a small child who had never learned to ask whether something was allowed before deciding it was. She knew that the people who loved each other most in her life were imperfect in specific, documented ways. Her father still graded papers at the kitchen table at 11 at night, still drove a car that should have been replaced years ago, still paused a beat too long before saying the thing he was actually thinking. Victoria still took phone calls at dinner sometimes, still kept her professional composure like a coat she couldn't fully take off, still left the cabinet door open when she was thinking about something else. They were, both of them, human in all the ways that mattered, and they had found each other in the gap between who they'd planned to be and who they actually were, and had decided, quietly, incrementally, without ceremony, to build something there. Emma thought that was the real story, not the photographs or the board meetings or the press narratives, not even the proposal in the blanket fort, which was a good story, and she told it whenever she got the chance. The real story was smaller and truer than all of that. It was the green mug on the second shelf. It was the map in the desk drawer. It was two people who had decided, against their own careful arguments, to stop doing the math and just come home. That was the story. That was the one worth telling.